Overlay colors and overlay gradients are a really, really important part of web design. Unfortunately, there's a lot of pitfalls to using overlays inside of Oxygen. In this training, I'm going to show you how Automatic CSS fixes those pitfalls and makes overlays an absolute breeze. So let's go ahead and jump into the training. First thing I want to point out here is, what is an overlay even used for? Why is it so important? Well, you can see here that when you create a section with a background image, or really any container with a background image or an image where you're going to overlay text, if you just have the regular image, you can't really read the text. This happens in most cases. Like you can see I have two very different images here, and the text blends in both of them. It blends into the silver in this one, and it blends into the yellow and her arm in this one. It just makes the text very, very difficult to read. So we need access to overlay styles just for simple readability purposes to make it so that we can read the text. But what we can also do with these overlay styles is really, really refine the look and feel of the website. You can add a lot of action and vibrancy to a web design with these really cool overlays. You can use basic colors. You can use, obviously, you would probably want to use your website's brand colors, which we'll talk about in just a second. You can also use gradients and make custom gradients and make some really funky looking or modern looking overlays. So one thing that people are going to point out is, hey, Kevin, in Oxygen, you can already create overlays. And that is absolutely true. For example, if I wanted to add an overlay to this background image right here, I can simply add a color to this box right here, and it adds an overlay. And I can even make it, transparent. So I can bring this down to like 85%. And now, look, this solves the problem, right? I can have my overlay color and I can see my text. Well, the problem is, one big problem in Oxygen is, in order to create an overlay, you have to abandon your brand colors, at least the global control of your brand colors. Here's what I mean. So I created this purple color, which is I just called it test. It's our test color, right? But this is supposedly a global color in Oxygen. So I assign the global color, and this, by the way, isn't the only problem with overlays in Oxygen. We'll get to another one in just a minute. But I assign the overlay color as my global color, but I realize, I can't see my image. So I actually need an opacity version of this color. Well, when I go to change the opacity, look what happens. It removes the global control. And now it's creating its own custom color that I no longer have control over. So let me show you something here. I hit save. Let's take a look at this on the front end. So I'm gonna go to the front end. I see what I want to see. That's my brand color. But what happened if my brand color changes? Watch this. So I go into, okay. I minimized the window on accident. I'm gonna go into the global colors area in Oxygen. And let's say my test color needs to change. And so I'm gonna change it to this blue right here. And I'm gonna go ahead and hit save. Did my overlays change? So let's go check on the front end. No. So if I use, based on my brand color, and I change the opacity to create my overlay effect, and I did that on 20 different sections across the website, and then my primary color needs to change, I have to go change all of those overlays manually now. I have no global control over that color. You lose the global control simply by using the overlay panel as it's designed in Oxygen. That's a big problem. The question is, does the same thing happen in Automatic CSS? So let's take a look. If I used a variable here, var primary, let's say, okay, which is a different color, but that's my site's primary color. Maybe a secondary of purple. That's like a pink. Okay, let's use secondary as a test here, right? So I use var secondary. But obviously I can't see the background image. And by the way, this is a variable from Automatic CSS that allows you to hook into the ACSS color system, your brand colors. Okay, these are not random colors. These are colors that you set. These are your website's brand colors. So this is your site's secondary color. If I want a transparent version, I simply add the extension trans, and then I can choose a percentage. So let's choose 80%, which would give us, excuse me, this nice overlay effect using our brand secondary color. Now I save. Let's view this on the front end. So this is the effect that I got. Now what happens if I change my site's secondary color? Well, we go there. Let me copy this so I don't lose it. But I'm going to choose this mint green, right? Hit save changes. The question is, does our front end change? And the answer is yes. So everywhere you've used this overlay style, because you're using Automatic CSS, you're retaining global control. And you can really theme a website where you can create an entire website with overlays, custom overlays, overlay gradients. And when you change the theme colors, nothing breaks. Everything is retained through the new colors, right? Very, very powerful stuff. So there's one big pitfall with overlays and Oxygen. The next pitfall with overlays and Oxygen is this. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to go back to using this color here, and I'll do the 80%. Okay, so I have this look and feel, and I'm like, you know what? I want to be able to use this exact same overlay style on other sections, like maybe this section down here. Pretend that there's 30 pages and you want to use this as your main hero overlay style, right? Well, there's a big problem in Oxygen. So you say, all right, well, I'm going to remove this from the ID level, but I copied and pasted it. So I'm going to remove it from the ID level. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a class called like my awesome overlay. And I'm going to assign that overlay style to this custom class because in theory, I should be able to go to this section, apply that class, get the overlay style, and life is good, right? Wrong. Okay, so I created my awesome overlay. I'm going to go to advanced background and I'm going to paste in the overlay color. Womp womp, right? Nothing happens. Why did nothing happen? Because in Oxygen, the background image and the overlay color, as well as the gradient style, if you want a gradient overlay, are all married together as one. And they all go with each other wherever they go. So if you look at my awesome overlay, there is no background image defined. And if there's no background image defined, the overlay color won't work and the gradient overlay won't work, right? So you're like, well, Kevin, that's no problem. Just remove the background image from the ID, okay? And then assign the background image to the class. All right, so let's see what happens there. So I assign the background image to the class. Bam. Okay, I got the effect, right? But now look at the problem. You've now effectively assigned that background image to that class. That's not what you wanted. And even still, it's not going to work. So I come down here and I apply my awesome overlay. Nothing. I get nothing. Why? Because this already has a background image defined with no overlay color. So if I remove this background image, I get my overlay effect, but guess what? I lost my background image, right? I'm forced to use this exact same background image everywhere that I use this overlay style because they're married together and you cannot separate them. Automatic CSS, on the other hand, does not have this problem. Now watch this. Even worse. When your background image is attached to a class, when you remove the class to remove the style, you also lose your background image. Big, big, big problem. So now I have to go to the ID level. I have to add my background image back to get back to where we started. I have to come up here, remove the class, add my background image back to get back to where we started. Okay. And let me check my recording. I just want to make sure that we're all good. Yes, we are. All right. Excellent. So now let's take a look at how Automatic CSS handles this, right? With classes. So you have the ability to assign any of the colors, primary, secondary, accent, base, shade, as an overlay at any transparency, 10%, 20, 40, 60, 80, 90. We're going to have the ones in between very, very soon as well. So you're going to have your 30s, your 50s, your 70s, etc. But this is so easy to add with classes. So let's say I want my site's primary color as an overlay up here and the site's secondary color as an overlay down here. Or maybe we want them to be the same. Okay, so let's just do overlay, primary, and then I add that trans extension, trans 80. So I have my site's primary color. Look, see that background image? What if I want the same overlay style right here, but with a new background image, right? This different background image. So I do overlay, primary, trans 80. It's not coupled. They're not married together, right? I can have any overlay style on any background image at any time with Automatic CSS simply by adding an overlay class. If I want to switch this to secondary, I can do overlay, secondary, it's all the same, secondary, trans 80. Now I have my site's secondary color as the overlay at 80%. What if I don't want it to be 80%? What if I want it to be 40%? Okay, overlay secondary trans 40 gives me 40% opacity. So now we're getting into a situation where I'm really just like tinting the image, okay? A whole different effect. What if I want my site's base color? I just want a nice dark overlay, right? No problem. Overlay, base, trans, 80. Now you can see that's really, really dark. So we want to dial this in. Maybe I don't want 80, maybe I want 60, okay? So we do overlay, base, trans, 60. Bam, I get it. So it's nice and dark, but I can still see the image and the text is very, very readable. And I'm not introducing a color here, right? You can also do black with the transparencies, with the overlay black, okay? Just like this. You can do overlay white. So you have white transparencies available to you. You also have the ultra dark and light versions of every color. So if you wanted to do, for example, I'll take off base trans 60. We're going to do overlay primary light trans, and maybe we want to do 80 here. And this is going to give us a nice washed out effect using the site's primary color. So it's got the primary color in there, but it's the light version of it, and it's washing out the background. And now what we could do potentially here is text primary dark. And we could do basically text in the same color family as this really light overlay. And you're really starting to put together a color theme here, okay? I'm gonna remove that. All of this is so easy with just adding and removing classes, right? So you can dial in exactly the look that you're going for. What if you wanted overlay, primary ultra dark, and a trans version of that, right? 60%. So now we have that primary color, but it's the ultra dark version at 60%. All slightly different looks, but gives you insane granular control. But now what if you're like, Kevin, I want even more granular control. First of all, Kevin, I want to make gradients, right? How do we make gradients while using our site's brand colors in a way that we still retain global control over everything? Is that possible? Or do I have to abandon automatic CSS in order to create custom gradients? And the answer is no. You never have to abandon automatic CSS to do anything. That's how it's designed. So we're going to go to advanced, background, gradient, and we're going to take a look at this gradient section. I'm going to add 2 colors. Now I'm going to add var, so all variables in CSS, really, it's not just automatic CSS, but all CSS altogether. If you want to use a variable, it's var and then parentheses. And then inside the parentheses, it starts with a double dash, and then you write the name of the variable. So all of our colors, all of our transparencies are available to you in variables in automatic CSS so that you can hook in to the color system for anything you need to do. So for example, here I'm going to do primary, trans, and then I'm going to choose my percentage. So I'm going to do 80%. And look, I get an 80% transparency of my primary color. Now I'm going to add another color to the gradient. I'm going to paste, and instead of primary, we're going to do secondary. Check this gradient effect out, right? Very, very cool stuff. If I wanted the top to not be transparent at all, or maybe less, I switch this to 90 and I get a different effect. If I wanted to lose the transparency there altogether, I can just do primary all the way down to secondary trans 80. And so I've completely blocked out the top, but I have transparency towards the bottom. And so you're just using different variables. I'll go back to trans 80 to dial in exactly what you want. If you want to add colors to this, no problem. So we'll go primary there, secondary there. Check out the effects that we're getting now. And these are all hooking in so that if your primary and secondary colors ever change, your gradients will remap themselves to the new colors. Very, very powerful stuff. So I'm going to delete these. That's an example of how you can create custom gradients using ACSS variables. But we're not done. What if you want even more granular control? You're like, Kevin, not only do I want 70% opacity, not 80, right? I noticed you didn't have a 70 there, right? Which we will in the future. But what if it was 72.5, right? You're a real stickler. You're like, I want 72.5% opacity. Maybe also you want to be able to slightly shift the saturation of one of your brand colors, or slightly shift the hue of one of your brand colors, or slightly shift the lightness of one of your brand colors. Even though we already have automatically generated shades in ACSS, even though we're giving you control of saturation in the dashboard panel very soon, you can do all of this stuff with what I call variable partials. And ACSS is one of the only frameworks that I know of that gives you partials to have insane granular control over your colors. So look what I mean. I'm going to take this out of gradients for a minute because gradients is already advanced. Right? Let's just keep this basic. In the image overlay color right here, I'm going to create a custom color. But in my custom color, I don't have to abandon automatic CSS. Let's take a look at how this works. So a little context. You have to know what HSL is, right? HSL is a color system, just like RGB. So you know what RGB is. There's RGB, there's HSL. HSL is actually easier to understand, all right? I love HSL. It's what the entire color system in automatic CSS is based on. HSL works like this. There are 3 variables that you need, or 3 properties, 3 values, I should say. One is the hue, and the hue is a degree on a color wheel, right? So if I do 255, that's 255 degrees on the color wheel. Now I'm going to do a comma. The other two values are the easiest to understand. Saturation, which is a percentage, and lightness, which is a percentage. We already chose our color. Our color is 255, but our saturation, let's put it 50%. And then our lightness, let's put it 50%. And this is the color that I can get. So HSL makes this so easy to independently alter variations of a color. So look at this. If I change my hue to 155, I get a completely different color. There's 255, whatever. And it keeps going around in the color wheel. Now, if I'm set on this, but I actually want a little bit less saturation or more saturation, I can do 40, 30. Look at this. The saturation is declining. All the way to 0 gives me gray. 10% gives me 10% of my hue into this color, right? Very easy to understand. What about lightness? Higher goes lighter, lower goes darker. So if I want it lighter, there's 60, 70, 80, 90. There's my lightness. 40, 30, 20, there's my darkness, right? So you can see here, and this is not automatic CSS yet. This is just understanding HSL. Because HSL, we're going to be able to plug variable partials into an HSL. And you're going to be able to see the amazing control that automatic CSS gives you for those of you who love custom control, granular control, right? Never tell me that automatic CSS doesn't give you granular control. It gives you more granular control than any framework available. Okay, so check this out. We want the hue of our website's primary color instead of this 255. 255 is just a random number, right? We want our brand color in here. So I want to access the hue of my website's primary color. ACSS gives you a variable for that. I call these, again, variable partials, right? It's a partial. It's not the entire color. It's a piece of the color, right? It's the hue of the color. So I put in var, and you know, anytime you're putting in a variable here, like we've covered, it's var parentheses double dash. So I'm going to do primary dash H for primary hue, and it's going to give me my website's primary hue. But look, 50% and 50% are random values, okay? So I need to replace those as well. I'm going to just copy the var primary H, delete this 50%, and I'm going to pop in, what do you think it is? For S for saturation, I can't talk today. S for saturation is primary S. And if I come down here and replace the last 50%, which is lightness, what do you think it is? L. So look, that is my website's primary color. I have now accessed, I've hooked into the brand color, my primary color, inside of a custom HSL. And I can prove it to you, right? I'll come up here and we're going to use a background color class, so BG primary, and it should exactly match what we see here. Check that out. It exactly matches. So that is absolutely our website's primary color, except we've created it in our own custom HSL string. So what does this allow us to do? It allows us to come in and maybe add a 4th value. If I add a 4th value here, that would be for opacity. Remember I said, who wants that really granular control? You want 74.25% opacity? 74.25%, that's the opacity that I get. And I don't have to abandon automatic CSS, right? Again, don't tell me Automatic CSS doesn't give you granular control. It gives you the most granular control of any framework. Now, that's not the only thing I can adjust. Let's say I want a custom saturation, but I don't want, like if the hue ever needs to change or the lightness ever changes because my brand colors change, it's okay. I leave these partials in here for hue and for lightness. And let me just take out the saturation real quick and watch this. I can put my own custom value for saturation. 60, 70, more saturation, right? Or less saturation. I can really dial this in to whatever I want. There is, let me put my saturation back. So var primary S for saturation. What if I wanted to change the lightness? I could take out L and I could put in my own lightness value. So there's 60, 70, 80, 80, let's do 62.5, 67.5, not 627, 67.5. There you can see, doesn't matter what you want to do, you can do it without abandoning Automatic CSS. And you're like, Kevin, why would you do this? Just put in your own HSL. Because then if your colors ever change, this won't. But when you have the variable partials in there, they will. So any changes you make to your color scheme, this is going to adapt even though you've customized the color, right? You're not going to lose the properties that are being pulled from variables, which are very important. Like your hue is being pulled. That's one of the most important, right? So it keeps everything in the same color family, even if the colors change. So this was a overview of how to use overlays in Automatic CSS in Oxygen. We talked about pitfalls of doing this with the Oxygen builder, how ACSS overcomes those pitfalls, how you can use custom classes to create overlays, or utility classes to create overlays, how you can create custom overlays with variables, and how you can use variable partials to even create custom colors with Automatic CSS. If you have any questions, drop them down below. Hit like, hit subscribe. If you need help, if you're an ACSS user and you need help, the ACSS community is available to you. We have dedicated support specialists, thousands of people willing to jump in and help you at any time. And if you are not a user yet, you need a copy. Where do you go? AutomaticCSS.com. Get yourself a copy. I'll be back very soon with another tutorial. Cheers.